Welcome back to the Restoring Darkness podcast. On today's show, we're joined by John Moody. He's a Canadian who lives in California, and he grew up in the Pacific Northwest. He has a bunch of different degrees here: petroleum engineering from UCLA. He's got an economics degree. He is also a Juris Doctorate degree from BYU Utah Law. So he's got a lot of education. He's worked for a number of years in the petroleum industry, but Mark Baker came to know him on a Facebook group called Blinding LEDs. And we're going to have a conversation with Mr. Moody about how the transformation of our society to LED has affected his health. But before we do, I want to go and talk a little bit about Mark's work at the Soft Lights Foundation. Mark, you're doing another petition. You're causing more trouble. What are you up to now?
We are, Michael. This is a big one. I live in the state of California, so I'm going to petition the California Department of Motor Vehicles. LED flashing lights on vehicles are causing serious harm to many individuals with disabilities, non-epileptic and epileptic seizures, migraines, panic attacks, impaired vision, impaired cognitive functioning, thoughts of suicide. These LED flashing lights are unregulated, and the use of these LED flashing lights has segregated our society into those without disabilities who can tolerate such light and those with disabilities who are acutely adversely impacted by the flashing lights. So the Soft Lights Foundation today will be submitting a petition to the California Department of Motor Vehicles to comply with the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and provide equal protection for all individuals. Equal protection means regulations, or in this case, we're petitioning for the prohibition of LED flashing lights on vehicles in the case where they are supplemental. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration regulates OEM flashing lights such as turn signals, but they leave it to the American states to regulate flashing lights that are supplemental. So our petition is to prohibit the use of these LED flashing lights on vehicles.
You know, I'll tell you this. Whenever I see a pulled over an accident when I'm on the highway and you have multiple police cruisers and maybe an ambulance or something like that, and they're flashing their lights, I say to myself, I don't know how those people can work in those conditions. When you're driving up to them, it is beyond alert. There's something very strange going on with those flashing red, blue, and stuff lights on top of police cars. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but that's a workplace hazard for those first responders. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
John, there's a couple things that came up in the intro. One of the words was photosensitive. Tell us in general how your body relates to light, and then specifically outline what the change from LED and how it's a change to LED has impacted your health.
Right. Excellent question. Photosensitive is a descriptive word. The diagnostic term that I've come to know from the medical profession is photophobia. That's what they call it. It's a very unfortunate term. It's not a fear of light, but that is the medical term. And it's like what you say, it's photosensitivity. Your skin can be photosensitive, but what we're talking about in particular is the eyes. My skin is not photosensitive to any sort of light other than just normal suntan. But from an earliest age, I felt weird, man. I mean, it was like I didn't feel well, and it was through elementary school. It was in all sorts of situations where I had eye ache, kind of a diffuse feeling of sickness, not feeling well, coming home from school and being sick or abdominal upset. This type of thing, I had no clue what was going on, as a child. And this continued on through even high school. And really what it was just the indoor lighting. It was, I guess it would have been fluorescent. I really wasn't even aware at the time that was the problem. All I knew is that I was different. I was not feeling great, and I sort of covered up. I got like a D in math in grade 3, and I couldn't learn. I mean, it was unbelievable. Elementary school for me was just a train wreck. The very thing that was, there to help people read and learn was preventing me from learning, basically. And then I went through this in high school as well, and it was just, I can't tell you how rough it was. It was just a real nightmare. And if you can imagine what that would be like, sitting in a classroom, basically in this low-level sort of pain situation going on, and then you're sort of developing, you're getting old every year, and your body's changing, and you have this problem going on, and it's affecting you in this certain way: headache, eye ache, general feeling of dis-ease, sometimes better, sometimes worse as you're developing. But overall, just bad news. And what it really does, it hits your confidence just like a ton of bricks. You just lose your confidence that you can do things, because you're always subconsciously thinking, I know I can't do that, and I don't really know why, but eventually you realize it's the lighting. And I was just in and out of doctor's offices, especially eye doctor's offices, and my parents would take me in. And this was up in Vancouver in those days. And they'd say, Mr. Moody, your son's eyes are perfect. They'd run you through the test. They never ask you questions like, are you photosensitive? Nothing of that sort. They just run you through the test. And this went on through the 90s, most of the 90s. And it was only until about 2008 that I actually got there. I noticed a change in the way they evaluated you when you go in. They don't just run you through the equipment. There was information coming about migraines and things like that, and they started connecting those dots. And they never really went out and said, this is what it is, but they eventually said, okay, it's migraine syndrome. Because in a typical migraine, we're kind of going into another layer of the issue here. When we bring up migraine, that just kind of evokes all these thoughts of, that go with migraine. You've heard.
Hang on, let me just step back here for a second, John, for 1 second. I want to ask you just to give me some dates. So, which decade were you in grade school in? Was it the 70s or the 80s?
That was in the late 60s and early 70s.
Okay. So I got some information for you. Okay. There's a professor out there. His name is Dr. Arnold J. Wilkins. And he has definitively proven that the temporal light modulation of T12 fluorescent lamps create those symptoms that you were talking about. And if you went to school in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it's almost 100% certain that the school buildings that you were in would have been illuminated using magnetic T12 fluorescent lights that had a temporal modulation aspect to them called flicker. And he proved without a doubt in a double-blind survey that type of light will cause the symptoms that you just laid out there. And so,
yeah, I have no doubt of that. I'm not consciously aware of the flicker problem. What I felt like, my problem was my eyes would the lower lids would start to twitch. And that's the first sign. That's the sign. Get out of Dodge now, because this is the last stop of the train. And then what happens is it goes into something in there, a muscle or a nerve goes into kind of like a cramp when you're swimming. You ever had that cramp in your leg, or when you're in the wrong position? Something there starts cramping up in a spasm, and it doesn't go away. Is the problem. It's like it just stays that way for days and days, and it's this pain. And what happens then is you become super sensitive to light. So it's this really bizarre migraine syndrome. I mean, the symptoms that I have, other than where I get the pain, are identical to migraine. And the progression, the abdominal upset, and the days in the dark room, and super sensitivity to light, a real nervous system impact. But what's different about me is that I never get a headache. It's just the eyes, and it's always just been the eyes. And then going into another layer, apparently, migraine is sort of just a word, right? I mean, if I ask you what's a migraine, I mean, could you really tell me?
They can't test for a migraine. It's described using symptoms.
And that's what I noticed. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you. So there's a lot of people listening to this that will think that you're a crank. I'm just going to tell you that right now. Now, that's not me and it's not Mark, but a lot of people are going to think that, oh, come on, this guy's just a complainer, whatever, get over it, this kind of stuff. What would you say, now, besides 4-letter words, so leaving that aside, that we're not going to get angry or swear at people on the show. You can do that in your private time. But really, what would you say to them before they, in order to try to convince them that this is a real problem? Because I think it's the biggest problem Mark and I face with this show is convincing people that light pollution is pollution and that there's all manner of problems caused by this kind of pollution. What would you say to them anecdotally from your perspective?
Well, I can understand their perspective. Mine is obviously one perspective of somebody who actually has the problem. And it's a matter of perception. If you don't have the problem, how do you possibly understand having it? You don't. It's like a binary situation. You either have the problem or you don't. Nobody in my family has this problem. So what you're describing describes the attitude of all of my siblings and all of my parents and both my parents. Nobody understands you. And this is it. And this is part of the problem is that you're just marginalized and discounted. I'm not a crank. I've been to Stanford. I got a graduate engineering degree from Stanford. I'm not a crank. This is absolutely true. There's nothing about this that is fabricated. I'm just, frankly, I'm doing people a favor, letting them know about this monster sort of migraine syndrome, because these very people that are saying things like this may have children that could potentially have this problem. And they'll go through the same nightmare that I did. Now, it may not be very many, it may be none, I don't know. But I'm just kind of sending out a warning. There's a monster disorder out there, very photophobia conditions like what I have, and God help you if you get it. I mean, it is bad.
Yeah, John, I confirm what you're saying. So I have filed a discrimination lawsuit against a shopping center. And so I'm working on their responses. They have these blue LED lights on the security system, and they're incapacitating for me. I can't think when I see those, and I just basically, I'm distracted and I can't function. But in their response, in their legal response, they said, well, if LEDs are so bad for you, Mr. Baker, how do you even get out of the house? How are you driving? How are you getting to the store? Because LEDs are everywhere. We think you're making this up, because if LEDs are everywhere, then why are you complaining about just this one LED? So that is the kind of response. And they clearly, they're lawyers, but they clearly don't feel themselves. Otherwise they would say, oh yeah, everybody hates those. So I agree with you on that. My question, John, to get into the next level. So fluorescents were a disaster for you. Michael suggests that it's a lot has to do with the flicker, the temporal light modulation. What about LEDs now? Is that like even a worse level than the fluorescents for you?
Yeah, I think if it is the flicker, if it was the flicker, I'm not aware of that. What I perceived is just something way too bright, and the inability of my eyes to handle the brightness of the source, the nature of the lighting in the room. So what I saw is just a problem with the light, period. Yet when I go outside, no problem. Now, you're right, it might be flicker. It might be other things too. I don't know. I mean, a professor can have made these findings, but, not to discount those, but, I think we should keep an open mind about other potential aspects, like what I've learned in soft lights, the spectrum, and I've learned a lot in soft lights, and so it sort of opened up my eyes, pun intended. But as far as LED, yeah, I can tell you all about LED. In 2016, I live in Davis, the city. I went away on vacation, and what I used to do is go for these late evening walks. It was very therapeutic for me. And then I went on vacation. I came back, and I went for my evening walk. And I come in the door, and my eyes start aching. And I'm thinking, oh, I feel a migraine coming on. That's bizarre. That never happened after my walk. So when I looked into it, I discovered they had changed the lights while I was gone. So there you go. I had no idea. And I did my walks like I normally do, and I came back and I had a migraine. And I communicated with the city, and I found out they had these lights. Then I went and looked at them. They were horrible. They were just horrible. This industrial sort of grilly look, and this light that was different. It was just horrible, and my eyes just absolutely hated it. And then the worst nightmare was they started putting them up everywhere, airports, back airport, all over the place. And I'm looking at them, and I'm just freaking out. I mean, these things don't attenuate. It's just a direct line of sight between the source and your eye. And I was getting like jabbing orbital pain, and it went on for like 3 weeks. So I was getting all the other symptoms plus this orbital assault on my eyes that I wasn't getting from the fluorescence. So the LEDs, they attack the surface of the eye, and I got this bruised feeling, but also this sharp, shooting, knife-like pain on the surface of the eyeball. And that would go on. It was horrible pain. And then it would dissipate over a couple of weeks, but I'd still get, even 3 weeks later, I'd get a transient jabbing and kind of lightning pain there. So it's clearly, you talk about radioactive ionizing. The way I view it is sort of, it's an attack on the eye, and your eyes are connected to the brain and the nervous system. And if you have something that's activating some sort of system there, other than what's intended, you got a real problem.
Yeah. So let me just go back to flicker again, because I know that, maybe you haven't thought of this or anything else, but what's interesting is that you actually described the difference between fluorescent flicker and LED flicker. So when fluorescent lights flicker, what happens is the light modulates. So it goes from 100% to 60%, or 100% to 55% or 70%. And that modulation is proven to cause the symptoms you're talking about. LED flicker is 0 to 100. So literally the light is going off and on 60 times a second. So that piercing and that fierceness that you felt is descriptive of the pain that would be caused by LED flicker. Now, not all LED lights flicker at that rate, but certainly early adoption of LED lights would flicker like that. And I think Davis was one of the first towns to adopt LED lights in California, maybe 2015 or 14 or something like that. And I would argue or suggest that it would be worthwhile to find out if those lights are flickering, and you can do that with a fidget spinner. If you just spin the fidget spinner, you'll see the flicker on the fidget spinner. If you go outside and you spin it, you won't see no flicker. If you go to a light source that has no flicker on it and spin a fidget spinner, you won't see any flicker on it. So it's very simple to figure out whether or not LED lights are flickering, but it's key to remember that it not only is it the same problem as fluorescent, it's significantly worse, the effect of it, because the LED is going from 100% light to 0. Whereas a fluorescent tube will stay on and kind of go off and stay half on and stay half on and then go on full. And so these effects are proven to cause all manner of health problems. It's not a question about it, John. It's proven.
Yeah.
When you're going into different environments, you're going about your life, you're going shopping, you're going to these different areas to do things. Do you see a difference between one building and the next, or is all interior light cause you problems?
The LEDs are different from the fluorescents. Fluorescents, I was able to use sunglasses indoors, be quick about my business, get in and out, 10, 15, 20 minutes, something like that, with the sunglasses on, like a Home Depot, whatever. And that worked fine as long as I could never work in one of those stores. And it just amazes me to see people like working as cashiers, no sunglasses on, completely unfazed. And I just look at that in astonishment, like, I have no clue how people could do that. It's so far from what I know, in terms of light perception. So as far as LED goes, Safeway converted to LED, and suffice it to say, I've never been to Safeway since then. Just horrible, twice as bright, horrible, way bright. I mean, you talk about flicker, but I'm just talking about brightness, man. I mean, just way brighter than I would ever need. I mean, the fluorescent, you go in a drugstore, same thing. It's like, people, you don't need this much light. You don't need half as much light. You don't even need you don't need 20% of that light. I know. Look at my conditions now. I mean, you don't need that, and your pupil will open up and you'll be fine. And so, maybe it's a cultural thing or habit. I don't know what it is. Sometimes I even wonder, is it really me with a disability, or is it everyone else? This obsession with extremely bright light. Now, you mentioned these people that say I'm a kook. Well, that's my response to them. Maybe they are, because I view this as fairly normal.
Do you think your condition is degenerative? And what I mean by that is that, do you think that time in your youth, going to school every day and feeling sick, caused more and more damage over time and actually increased your sensitivity? Or do you think it's just when you're getting this light, you get these symptoms, and when you don't have it, you don't? Like, you haven't gotten worse over the course of your life?
That's hard to assess. I think it has gotten worse, but to some degree, I don't know if you know much about pain medicine, but what they will tell you is that these pain pathways tend to become burned into your system. So once the pain develops a route, it becomes like, it's like an old cart path becoming a freeway, as far as pain signals go. So there's definitely part of that in it, but really it's been fairly stable. But I've avoided the problem, I avoid those lights. The 10 minutes in the store, don't go to Safeway anymore. I can't walk at night anymore. I can't drive at night anymore. The LED lights that was the difference that LED made, was that they just blew me out of the water. I just don't go anywhere near them. And maybe the flicker, but I'm seeing a lot of light. I look at a store and the house light. Oh man, I mean, you talk about the street light. It wasn't long after that the house lights started going up. We didn't need any of those lights in the 90s. And in the 90s, the lights were soft, sort of amber glow. The developer put them in. Not offensive. They were fine. But now suddenly we need all these bright LED lights on homes and garages. Please tell me why.
I'm the host of the Restoring Darkness podcast. I can't answer that question. I'm here to fight.
It's a rhetorical question.
But I'll tell you why. It's because of something called Javon's paradox. And that's because the cheaper something becomes, the more of it we use, right? So the cost of LED, high brightness LED outdoor lighting has completely collapsed. And so you can buy a 300 watt LED light fixture, 200 watt or whatever, 100 watt on Amazon for like $150. If you wanted to create that kind of light in the past, you would need, a 500 watts or 1,000 watts, and the fixture would cost way more and you'd use way more electricity. And so the fact is that light pollution has become affordable, Mark Baker.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Michael. And just before we go too far into the show and just talk about flicker only, there are other properties, as John mentioned. There is spatial properties and there are spectral properties. So when John does mention that, wow, it seems so bright in the safe way, it could be, it's a combination of the intensity, the radiance. In the case of LEDs, we should be measuring radiance, maybe luminance, but really radiance, which is the density of the light. And then the spectral power distribution, if it's got more blue, which is what they did, they shifted to a lot more blue. Our perception of brightness is that, wow, that's a lot brighter. So we have those things going on. So when people ask us, well, what's the cause of your problem? It's really hard to know. It could be a combination of all three of those things. So we always have to look at all three of those things. Hey, John, you went through this suffering with fluorescent lights all through your life. You ended up being successful through school and getting all this education and stuff. It must have been very tough for you. Would you have advice for school districts now that are shifting and have been shifting to LED lights? Is there anything that you'd want to say to a school district as to how they should pay attention to the light's impact on their students?
Well, I think the shift to LED lights was reflexive. They were just sort of put in. There was no questioning it. They just threw out a whole history of lighting, just threw it in the garbage like trash, and came out with LEDs as if this is the magic solution. They're ugly as sin. They look like, a computer chip or something in a lamp housing. Ugly as crap. I mean, you look at like the Art Deco era. If you ever seen the show Hercule Poirot, you look at the aesthetic beauty of architecture and how lighting is part of that. Man, we've lost all that, and that was soft lighting. And you talk about, okay, it's cheaper to make light pollution now. Yeah, I totally agree, but why on earth do you want to make light pollution? I can tell you why. It's because the lights were sold as energy efficient, so you're being a good green citizen to buy. It was a brilliant marketing strategy, and then they also put these nice little decorative housings on them they were useless, but curb appeal increases the value of your home. You put a little lantern on the garage, and my neighbors have done that. They put 4 on them. You put them little garden decoration lights. So all this LED lighting was sold to add to the curb appeal of home. And this is what's happened throughout my neighborhood. And this is all unnecessary lighting. It's just light pollution. But it's curb appeal, and the real estate likes it. It makes the homes look cute. But at night, it's a bad scene. They've destroyed darkness. They're lighting up neighborhoods, and that, like, you wouldn't believe. And then you add the street lights, and at some point you have to. I worked as a regulator for well over 28 years for Cal EPA, and I worked in the water quality arena, but the concept apply to lighting as well. Not that there's environmental regulations, but man, I can't tell you. You could have this area of light pollution lends itself perfectly to the existing regulatory structure of environmental regulations. The concept, it's like hand in glove. The concept, beneficial uses, sectors, all this stuff. But there's not a will to question, do we need this light? Is this light serving us, or why do we have all this light? Is it just for curb appeal on homes? And what's the point of this?
That's a good question.
I don't get it. I guess that's why I'm a nut. I don't get it.
You hit the nail on the head. So what happened in the lighting industry is that it was taken over by the Department of Energy and then different accreditation agencies, and used as a nail to be hit with the climate change hammer. And so what happened was some people that weren't in lighting, they weren't lighting people, got together and they said, we need to make a certification. What's the metric? What's the metric? What's the metric? Oh, lumens per watt is the metric. And so a whole bunch of different things related to lumens per watt have caused light pollution to increase by 10% every year since 2014. And when we say light pollution, you're talking about sky glow, you're talking about light trespass. There's all different kinds of light pollution, but it's a catastrophe. And I say that not exaggeration, John. It's a catastrophe. And so lumens per watt was the metric that the Department of Energy and their downstream accreditation agencies chose to be the only thing that mattered in lighting from about 2012 to about 2021. All that mattered was how many lumens were you cranking out per watt and what was the highest rating you could get. And that was 5,000 Kelvin. And it was direct LED chip at the place where you want to illuminate. No diffusers, no reflectors, nothing. Just a really bright laptop screen attached to a post. And that was a switch largely from high pressure sodium, which does not flicker and has a Kelvin temperature of, I don't know, Mark's going to correct me, 1800, 1900 Kelvin.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a massive change without consultation. There was never a consultative process in any of these projects by neighborhoods. No sample installs first, have the neighborhood come have a look at it like any other change. They just rammed them in everywhere. And that's where we are.
Yeah, I hear you. I was no friend. The high pressure sodium, I was okay with them. I mean, they weren't like, as I was saying, the Pure Perot days, Art Deco, and they weren't real aesthetic. They were big, tall things, but they worked and they were widely spaced. They were dirty, which was great because it made it a bit dimmer, and they were actually fine for me. I'd walk 2 miles a night.
Yeah,
so
I'm going to go back to Mark and say HPSs don't flicker, Mark. I think flicker is a huge problem with LEDs. So, Mark, we're going to close up. Sorry.
Okay, but HPS is not 5,000 K either.
That's true too.
Yeah, it was a big disaster. Like I said, go ahead, John.
And then Nisa Khan kind of chimed in for a while there. I haven't heard from her in a while, but then she pulls out the mathematics, and I can tell you, I've taken advanced math at Stanford and solved partial differential equations. So then a question came up. Well, has anyone run the basic math and physics on these lights? Well, she did, and she's from Bell Labs, and she's saying, this is like quasi-laser beam. And so we can talk about flicker and we can talk about spectrum, but if we got a quasi-laser beam, mathematically, that's nothing even close to the lighting that we had. That's basically laser light, and that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, you're talking about a pulsating laser beam now too, right? So not only is it...
It could well be. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not a direct laser, obviously, but it doesn't attenuate with inverse square distance. And I can see that because when I look across at my neighbor's light, it's just, my eyes are just offended by it. I mean, there's no attenuation there, and I can see it right away. I mean, it's horrible. So, it's like Mark said, there's all these problems, and then they kind of hit, somebody like me who had a big problem before they even came. And so that's why I say I'm like patient zero. But as far as public safety, go ahead.
Oh, well, you just brought up another topic, so let's just address that. Public safety. This is one of the big things they talk about. We need those street lights for safety, and yet we had a guest on this show that showed us statistically that makes no sense. There is no improvement on public safety, so why do we have these lights? When you go for your walks outside at night, what would be your preference? Would you prefer to have no street lights? We had a guest on recently who was in the lighting industry and said that in residential neighborhoods, we really don't even need any street lights. Would that be something that you would support?
Well, where I'm coming from basically, and especially as a former Cal EPA regulator, where I'm coming from is we need some fairly robust regulations locally or state to regulate all this circus, because you've got house lights, garage lights, landscaping lights. You could take out all the street lights and you still got a big pollution problem.
Yes.
You've got lights that are being put up because they're decorative. And the worst of it is the people who put them up don't have to look at them. They go in their home.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Isn't that so true? Is that the people that create that kind of light? That's what we call a light trespass, right? So it's where you're shining light onto other people's properties or into other people's spaces. And, in some ways it's just annoying, and other times it's offensive and it can cause problems. So, yeah, light trespass is a massively growing problem as people start to fight for their rights to create light pollution. You see it every day. Mark sees it all the time, and quite frankly, I see it all the time as well. We're coming up on 40 minutes. We're coming up on 40 minutes, so we'll say this will be your final thoughts, John. Let us know what you think about what we're doing here, and if there's any way we can help you.
Yeah, I love your show. I think it's a quality show. I love the content. So just keep it up. My pet peeve these days is with in the LED era. Now we see lights left on all day. I see it's quite common, and you can see they're visible in the day. They're brighter than daylight. They're much brighter than daylight. So you can take that and smoke it as well, but other than that, I just wanted to share my story, and it's a warning to all these people who think that my problem doesn't exist. Watch out for your children. Have them checked out, because none of my family had this problem, and it's lurking out there. I don't wish it on anybody. So.
Well, thank you very much, John Moody, for joining us on the show today, and I wish you all the best with your ongoing struggle and health concerns. You're in our thoughts and prayers. I want to invite all the listeners to go to restoringdarkness.com. If you want to donate to the work of this show and to the Lighting in Darkness Foundation, please do so. And I'd also like you to visit softlights.org, where Mark Baker is always causing trouble, stirring up crap for everybody, suing people, doing petitions. But you know what? This is how our society works. And people don't like this, or they think it's negativity and all this sort of stuff. But if you want to affect change, you got to go to the courts. That's where it works. That's where you get change. And the only way you can get change is by demonstrating damages. That's how the system works. You don't have a lawsuit if there's no damages. You just have a disagreement. But if there's damages, then you have the foundation for a lawsuit. And that's why we brought John Moody on the show today, not to encourage people to be litigious, but just really to remember that Mark Baker's work is so essential in this. So go to softlights.org. And for all you out there listening, thank you very much. And we'll see you next time on Restoring Darkness. Bye for now.